My name is Claire. I am 30 years old, and until last year, I believed my family was unbreakable. We were not rich, but we had love, or at least that's what I thought. Every holiday, every birthday, every Sunday dinner, it all felt like home. My father used to say family was the only true treasure in life. I believed him with all my heart. I grew up in a small town in Texas, where my father owned a modest business passed down from his father. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and it gave us pride. I worked in that business alongside him since I was a teenager. While my friends spent their summers at the lake, I spent mine taking phone calls, filing papers, and learning the trade. I never complained. I thought I was earning my place in the family legacy. My mother had passed away when I was in college, and since then it had been just me, my father, and my younger brother Daniel. He was the golden child, carefree and charming, while I was the responsible one who never caused trouble. Everyone in town saw me as the reliable daughter, and Daniel as the fun one. I didn't mind. I thought we balanced each other out. For years, I dreamed of one day helping my father expand the business. I imagined bringing in new ideas, maybe even opening a second branch, making him proud. He always told me, "One day this will all be yours, Claire. You've earned it." Those words kept me going through every late night and every tired morning. But dreams can shatter in a single moment. And mine did, on a night I will never forget. It was Christmas Eve when everything began to unravel. The house smelled of cinnamon and roasted turkey, the kind of warmth that usually made me feel safe. Our relatives filled the living room, laughing, exchanging gifts, pretending that nothing in the world could go wrong. But under the glow of twinkling lights, I sensed something different, a heaviness in the air I couldn't name. My father was quieter than usual, his sharp eyes darting across the room as though he was carrying a secret. Daniel, of course, was the center of attention. He told jokes, poured drinks, and played the role of the charming son while I stayed in the kitchen, making sure everyone had what they needed. That had always been my place, working in the background, holding everything together while others shined. When dinner was finally served, we gathered around the long wooden table. Candles flickered, laughter rose, and for a moment, it felt almost perfect. I tried to believe we were still a family, despite the cracks I'd been feeling for months. But then my father cleared his throat, his voice slicing through the noise. "I have something to announce," he said firmly. The room fell silent. Even Daniel stopped grinning. I froze with my fork halfway to my mouth, a strange chill running down my spine. He looked at me first, then at Daniel, then at the rest of the family. His voice was steady but cold. "I've decided to sell the business." The words echoed in my ears. Sell the business? The very business I had given my youth to, the one he had promised would one day be mine? Before I could react, he added the words that shattered me completely. "And I've made arrangements. None of you children will receive anything from it." I felt the world tilt beneath me. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard him right. But the silence that followed told me everyone else had heard it too. And just like that, the warmth of the holiday turned into ice. The silence that followed my father's words was deafening. For a moment no one moved. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, some cruel joke to break into laughter. But there was no joke. His face was like stone, his eyes unflinching. My fork slipped from my hand and clattered onto the plate. I searched Amanda's face, no Daniel's face. Anything that could explain this nightmare. Daniel was the first to react. He leaned back in his chair, smirking the way he always did when life handed him something unfair, but not devastating. "Well, I guess that's that," he said casually, as if this news didn't destroy me. My chest tightened. I wanted to scream, to remind him that while he was off chasing parties and adventures, I had been the one holding everything together. But the words stuck in my throat. Relatives exchanged awkward glances, pretending to sip their drinks. No one dared to speak. Finally I whispered, "But Dad, you promised." My voice broke, trembling like a child's. He didn't flinch. "Promises change," he said coldly, cutting through my heart like glass. "Life changes. You'll understand one day." Understand? How could I possibly understand being erased from the very future I had sacrificed everything for? My entire life had been tied to that business, to his words, to his approval. And now, in front of the people I loved most, he stripped me of it all. I looked at Amanda, my sister-in-law, searching for comfort. She lowered her eyes, avoiding mine. Daniel chuckled softly, shaking his head, almost enjoying the spectacle. That was the moment I realized I was utterly alone. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the words "you'll get nothing" ringing in my ears like a cruel lullaby. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face, cold and unshaken, as though I were nothing more than a burden he was finally free of. Tears slid down my cheeks silently, soaking the pillow. I tried to muffle my sobs, afraid that even the walls might judge me for breaking. My chest felt heavy, as though a stone had been lodged there, crushing me with every breath. I thought about all the years I had spent working by his side, the nights I skipped out with friends because I had to help at the shop, the mornings I woke up before dawn to prepare the accounts. I thought about the pride I used to feel whenever he said, "This will all be yours one day." And now all of it was gone, stolen in a single sentence. The shame was unbearable. Everyone at that table had seen it. They had witnessed my humiliation and said nothing. Not one person stood up for me. Not even my brother. Not even Amanda. I felt erased, not just from the business but from the family itself. I curled up under the blanket, my hands trembling, whispering to myself, "Why? Why wasn't I enough?" The silence answered back, cruel and final. By morning my eyes were swollen, my throat raw from crying. But inside something darker was taking root. A seed of anger, small but powerful, buried under the grief. They thought I would break. They thought I would disappear quietly. But they were wrong. The days that followed blurred together. I moved through them like a ghost, performing my routines, but inside I was hollow. And yet, the more I thought about what had happened, the more old memories began to resurface, memories of every sacrifice I had ever made for this family. I remember being 16 when all my friends went on the summer trip to Florida. I had begged my father to let me go, but he said the business needed me. So while everyone else posted photos of beaches and laughter, I sat behind the counter of our shop, ringing up sales and sweeping the floor. At the time I told myself it was worth it. I told myself I was building a future. I remembered college too. How I had the chance to study out of state, to chase a bigger dream. But Dad said tuition was too high, and he couldn't run the business without me. So I stayed, enrolled in a local program, and commuted every day. I worked late shifts at the shop and studied by the glow of the office light. While my brother partied and lived freely, I was the one balancing ledgers and filing taxes. Even when Mom was alive, she would whisper to me, "You're the strong one, Claire. You're the one keeping us together." And I believed her. That belief carried me through every disappointment, every lost dream. Now, as I sat alone in my room, those memories cut deeper than ever. Every sacrifice I had made had been for nothing. I had built my life on promises that turned to ashes in my hands. I clenched my fists, whispering to myself, "They think I'm weak. They think I'll just fade away." But a spark had ignited inside me. I wasn't fading. I was waking up. The tension in the house grew thicker with each passing day. My father avoided me, as though I were nothing more than a shadow haunting his hallways. Daniel carried on with his carefree charm, tossing casual remarks that cut deeper than knives. And Amanda, she kept her silence, her loyalty tied to her husband instead of her blood. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table again, Daniel laughed at something trivial. I barely heard the joke, but I caught his smirk, his eyes glinting as he said, "Guess you'll need to find a new purpose now that Dad's made his decision. Maybe start knitting or something." The table erupted with awkward chuckles. My father didn't even raise his head. My chest burned, but I forced myself to swallow the insult. Until Amanda joined in, softly, nervously, but enough to pierce through me like a blade. That was it. My patience snapped. The fork in my hand clattered against the plate as I stood up, my chair scraping the floor. My voice trembled, but it carried the weight of years of silence. "Do you even hear yourselves? Do you realize how much I gave up for this family? While you were out living your perfect lives, I was here working, sacrificing, believing his promises. And now you laugh at me? Like I'm nothing." The room froze. For the first time in years, every eye was on me. But not with respect. With pity. With discomfort. With dismissal. My father finally looked up, his expression tired, his voice sharp. "Enough, Claire. Stop making a scene." That sentence broke something inside me. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I picked up my plate, carried it to the sink, and walked out of the house without another word. The cold night air hit my face, but it felt freeing. For the first time I realized I couldn't change them, but maybe, just maybe, I could change myself. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the thin motel curtains, casting pale stripes across the worn-out carpet. I hadn't slept much, but for the first time in weeks, the ache in my chest didn't feel like it was swallowing me whole. Felt lighter. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching a notebook I'd bought at a corner store. On the first page, I wrote one simple sentence. This is not the end. This is where I begin. My handwriting trembled, but the words felt like a promise I couldn't afford to break. I spent the morning walking the streets with a quiet determination. I checked bulletin boards outside grocery stores, small diners, even laundromats. Anywhere there might be a help wanted sign. Most places turned me down. Some said I was overqualified. Others didn't bother to hide the doubt in their eyes. A widow in her late 50s, alone and desperate, wasn't exactly the image of reliability. By noon my feet ached and my pride stung. But giving up wasn't an option. I had already lost everything once. I wouldn't let it happen again. That evening I returned to the motel with a bag of cheap groceries. Instant noodles, tea bags, and a loaf of bread. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As I boiled water on the little electric kettle, I caught my reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes weren't just sad anymore. They were sharp, focused. I whispered to my reflection, "You're stronger than they think. Stronger than you think." That night, as I lay on the stiff mattress, I began sketching out a plan. Not just for survival, but for something bigger. Something that would make sure no one, Amanda, Chad, or anyone else, would ever hold power over me again. For the first time in months, I fell asleep not with tears on my pillow, but with resolve in my heart. The days at the motel blended into one another, gray and quiet, until one evening I pulled out the old memory box I had carried with me. It was the only thing I couldn't bring myself to leave behind when I walked out of Amanda's apartment. Inside were faded photographs, brittle letters, and tiny keepsakes that smelled faintly of the cedar chest they once lived in. At the bottom of the box, hidden beneath a folded tablecloth, was a small leather-bound book. My hands trembled when I lifted it, recognizing it instantly, my mother's diary. I had never opened it before, too afraid of what I might find. But tonight, loneliness pressed on my chest so heavily that I needed something, anything, that would make me feel close to family again. The first few pages were ordinary, almost comforting. Notes about church, the weather, the price of groceries. But then as I turned further, my heart began to race. He came again today. He said he wished things were different. That he wished I could be his wife. But he has a family, a business, a name to protect. Margaret will never know. She must never know. I froze. My eyes scanned the page again and again, each word hitting me like a stone. Margaret, me. She was talking about me. I flipped frantically through the pages. More entries, each filled with the same initials. HGS meetings in hidden places, promises of money she never wanted but desperately needed, confessions of a love that could never be. And then one entry stopped me cold. He said he's made arrangements. If something ever happens to him, Mr. Goldstein will know what to do. Margaret will be taken care of. She may not know the truth now, but one day she must. I sat back on the bed, my chest heaving. 100 questions swirled in my mind. Who was HJS? What had he left behind? And why had my mother kept this secret her entire life? For the first time in months, a spark lit inside me, not of sorrow but of purpose. I wasn't just a widow with no place to call home. I was someone with a hidden history, a forgotten story waiting to be uncovered. And I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't ignore this. This diary wasn't just a book of memories. It was a map, leading me to a truth that could change everything. That night I didn't cry. I didn't even try to sleep. Instead, I sat with the diary in my lap, whispering to myself, "You thought I was finished. But you have no idea who I really am." The diary didn't leave my hands for days. Each night, I'd return to the same sentences, tracing my mother's handwriting with trembling fingers as if the ink itself could whisper answers. But the more I read, the more one detail kept flashing like a beacon in the dark. Mr. Goldstein will know. It was the only concrete clue buried in all those secret entries. The initials HJS gave me no peace, but the name Goldstein, that was something real, someone who might still exist. One morning, unable to bear the uncertainty, I gathered what little money I had left and sat at the motel's old desktop computer in the lobby. The screen flickered with a dull glow, and the keyboard clacked loudly with every letter I typed. Goldstein Lawyer, Texas. The results scrolled endlessly, but then there it was. Leonard Goldstein, retired estate lawyer, still listed under a small private firm in Dallas. My heart pounded so hard I had to grip the edge of the desk to steady myself. Could it really be him? The man my mother trusted to protect a secret she never dared to tell me. I didn't call right away. My hands shook too much. Instead, I bought a notepad from the gas station next door and wrote a letter the old-fashioned way, pouring my trembling thoughts onto paper. I told him who I was, who my mother had been, and begged for a chance to meet. 2 weeks passed before my motel phone rang. I nearly dropped it when I heard the voice on the other end. "This is Leonard Goldstein. I knew your mother. I've been waiting for this call, though I always thought it might never come." Tears stung my eyes. He sounded old, frail, but there was something in his voice, truth. "There's something you need to see, Margaret. Something your mother wanted you to have. Can you come to Dallas?" I sat there, clutching the receiver, shaking from head to toe. For months I had been lost, erased, forgotten. And now the pieces were beginning to fit. For the first time in so long, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. I was ready. The bus ride to Dallas felt longer than it was. Every bump in the road rattled through my chest like a reminder. My life was about to change one way or another. When I finally stepped into Leonard Goldstein's quiet office, it was like walking into another world. Shelves lined with old law books towered over me, and the air smelled faintly of leather and dust. He was older than I expected, with thinning white hair and tired eyes, but when he saw me, he smiled softly. "Margaret," he said, as if he'd known me all along. I sat down across from him, my hands twisting nervously in my lap. Without a word, he reached into a locked drawer and pulled out a yellowed envelope. My name, Margaret Louise, was written across it in a firm, steady hand. I hesitated. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal and unfolded the fragile paper inside. The words blurred through my tears, but I forced myself to keep reading. "To my daughter, Margaret. I have lived my life with a mask, and because of that, I failed you. I should have claimed you, loved you openly, but I was a coward. Still, you are my blood. I cannot leave this world without ensuring you have something of what I built. This is my final promise to you." I stopped, pressing the letter to my chest as if holding it closer could heal the years of silence. For so long I thought I was unwanted, unloved. And here it was in black and white. Proof that I had been chosen, even if in secret. Leonard slid a folder across the desk. Inside were documents, bank accounts, titles, investments. My mind spun as he explained. It wasn't just a token inheritance. It was millions. Enough to rebuild, enough to start fresh. But the money wasn't what broke me open. It was the final line of the letter. "Margaret, you were never a mistake. You were my greatest truth." For the first time in months, I felt the weight on my chest lift. My mother's secrets, my daughter's betrayal, my loneliness, it all shifted. Because now, I wasn't just the forgotten widow. I was someone with a name, a legacy, a reason to rise again. When I left Leonard's office that day, the city looked different. The buildings seemed taller, the air sharper. As if the world itself had shifted just because I finally knew who I was. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking as a woman erased. I was walking as Margaret Louise Sterling, the daughter of a man who once built empires, and the woman who now carried his blood. I sat in a cafe across from the bus station, the letter folded carefully in my purse. My hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, though I could barely taste it. My thoughts kept circling the same truth. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I had been given a second chance. It wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about identity. My whole life I'd been told I wasn't enough, that I was just a widow, a mother who gave too much, a burden on people I loved. But now there was proof that I mattered. Proof written in ink by a man whose name could open doors I never dared to knock on. That night, back in my small rented room, I spread the documents across the table. Bank statements, property deeds, investments, it was overwhelming. But instead of fear, I felt determination. If I could raise a daughter, hold a family together, survive loss and humiliation, then I could certainly learn how to manage this. I made a silent vow as I read every line, every number. I would never again beg for scraps of kindness. I would never again let anyone treat me like a burden. I would rise, not out of spite, but because I finally believed I could. And yet, even with this newfound strength, there was an ache in my chest. Amanda, my daughter, the girl I raised with love and sacrifice. She had chosen Chad over me, turned her face when I needed her most. Could I forgive that? I didn't know. All I knew was this. I had power now, and with it came choices. And soon those choices would change everything. The bus ride back to Austin felt longer than it should have, though my chest carried a steadiness I hadn't felt in months. I stared out the window, watching the Texas countryside blur past. Fields, highways, small towns. My reflection in the glass looked different, sharper, more awake. When I finally stepped off the bus, the evening air wrapped around me like a reminder. This city had once chewed me up and spit me out. But now, I was no longer that broken woman begging for a roof. I had walked through the fire and carried proof of who I was. I rented a modest apartment downtown. Clean lines, modern kitchen, glass windows that overlooked the streets below. It wasn't about showing off, it was about standing tall. Amanda and Chad would never imagine I could afford a place like this. That thought made me smile, not out of revenge, but out of quiet satisfaction. The first night there, I brewed myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window, watching headlights move like fireflies on the highway. For the first time in years, I felt no rush, no need to explain myself, no desperation to be accepted. I belonged to myself. Still, every silence carried her name, Amanda, my daughter. I wondered if she lay awake in her bed, realizing the cost of her choices. Did she miss me? Did she regret the way Chad had poisoned her against me? The ache remained, but I didn't let it define me anymore. Instead, I opened a notebook and began to write, not just about the inheritance but about my life. The betrayal, the loneliness, the strength I had found in the ashes. Line by line, page by page, I was reclaiming my voice. And deep inside, a seed of resolve was planted. If Amanda came back into my life, it would be on my terms. Not as a mother begging for love, but as a woman who had learned to stand on her own 2 feet. The mornings in my new apartment felt different. The sun streamed through the tall glass windows, painting the floor in shades of gold. I would sit at the little wooden desk I had bought secondhand, sipping coffee, and plan my day. It wasn't grand or glamorous, but it was mine. I started small. I opened a bank account in my own name, something Amanda and Chad could never touch. Then I signed up for a few community classes, budgeting, real estate basics, even public speaking. At first, I felt awkward sitting among strangers, but slowly, I realized I belonged there as much as anyone else. Each class reminded me of something I had forgotten. I was capable of learning, of rebuilding, of being more than what they had reduced me to. My confidence grew with every notebook I filled and every stranger who greeted me like I mattered. At night, when I returned home, I'd light a single candle by the window and reread my mother's diary. Her words weren't just memories anymore, they were lessons. She had lived in silence, hidden in shame. I refused to repeat her fate. One evening, as I walked through the streets of Austin, I passed by the very building Amanda and Chad still lived in. The lights in their apartment flickered. I stood across the road, hidden in the shadows, and watched. I wasn't there out of bitterness. I was there to remind myself how far I had come. I didn't need to knock. I didn't need to beg. I had built a door of my own. And for the first time, I realized that the power they thought they had over me was gone. Completely gone. That night, I whispered to myself in the mirror, "This is just the beginning." When I first held the deed to the apartment complex in my hands, it felt almost unreal. This was the very building where I had been humiliated, where I had walked out with nothing but 2 suitcases and a broken heart. Now, quietly, without Amanda or Chad knowing, I was the one holding the power. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't tell anyone. Power works best when it's invisible, when the other side doesn't even know they're playing on your board. The first letters went out, formal and impersonal. Rent reassessments, lease renewals, stricter conditions. Chad raged, Amanda texted, but I remained silent. My company name, ML Holdings, shielded me like armor. No one knew it was me. I watched from a distance. Their anger grew, their arguments became louder. and their comfort slowly slipped away. Yet, for me it wasn't about revenge, it was about balance. They had stolen my dignity, and now life was restoring the scales. Each night I would light that same candle in my window and whisper to myself, "This isn't cruelty. This is consequence." And though I knew they would never understand it, I felt my mother's words echo through the years, guiding me. Never let them break you. For the first time in decades, I wasn't surviving, I was controlling the game. The silence in their apartment didn't last long. Chad wasn't a man who could live without control. The moment their rent tripled, the cracks inside that home began to spread. I didn't need to be there to see it, I could feel it from miles away. Amanda's voice messages had shifted from confusion to desperation. She spoke in hushed tones, almost afraid that Chad might overhear. "Mom, things are getting really bad. I don't know what to do. Please just talk to me." But I stayed quiet. Every message she sent was a reminder of the night I carried my suitcases out into the cold. The night she let silence replace love. That memory anchored me whenever doubt crept in. Inside their apartment, Chad was unraveling. He argued with Amanda over bills, over groceries, over the smallest things. He blamed her for not convincing me to leave sooner, for not standing up to me when I was living off them. The irony was sharp enough to cut through steel. I didn't need revenge. I needed them to taste the consequences of their choices. And for the first time I realized the consequences were working faster than I expected. Amanda was breaking just as I had broken once. But the difference was clear: when I broke, no one stood by me. When she broke, she knew I was still out there. And that truth would haunt her more than Chad ever could. That night I couldn't sleep. The weight of silence pressed harder than any words ever could. I found myself standing outside Amanda and Chad's apartment building, the one I now owned. The lights from their window flickered faintly, shadows crossing back and forth. My chest tightened as I imagined what their conversations must sound like inside. His anger, her quiet attempts to calm him. I stood there for nearly an hour, hidden in the shadows. Part of me wanted to knock, to remind Amanda that I was still her mother. But another part whispered that silence was more powerful. They needed to feel the absence I once filled, to understand that pushing me away came with consequences. The wind cut sharp against my face, but I didn't move. I thought about the girl Amanda used to be. The one who clung to me when storms rattled the house, who believed my arms could protect her from anything. And now she lived with the very storm she once feared. When the clock struck midnight, I finally walked away. Each step echoed with a strange mix of sorrow and resolve. I wasn't finished yet. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about balance. They had tipped the scales against me, and I was slowly setting them right again. As I returned to my small apartment, I realized something important. I no longer felt powerless. My silence had become a weapon, and for the first time in a long time I was in control. 3 days later, Amanda's name flashed across my phone screen. For a moment my heart betrayed me. I almost answered. Almost. My thumb hovered above the green button, aching to hear her voice, to believe she had finally remembered that I was her mother before anything else. But I didn't. I let the phone ring out, then listened to her voicemail. "Mom," she began, her voice shaky. "I know things are complicated. Chad's been angry, really angry. But I miss you. Can we talk? Please." Her plea cracked something inside me. For years, I would have dropped everything to rush to her side no matter what. But those days were gone. She had stood by while Chad stripped me of dignity, while he tossed me out like garbage. And now, only when her world began to tremble, she remembered me. I sat in silence long after the message ended, the phone still warm in my hand. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to stay still. This wasn't about cruelty. It was about letting her face the silence she had once forced upon me. That night, I opened my mother's diary again. Her words stared back at me. She must never know. But I did know. And now that knowledge gave me strength. It reminded me that love doesn't mean blind forgiveness. Love also means boundaries. The next morning, I wrote Amanda a message but never hit send. "You chose your silence once. Now it's mine." I deleted it before the temptation could grow. Instead, I called the contractor for the building repairs. If Amanda and Chad thought the rent increase was difficult, they hadn't seen anything yet. Real change doesn't come with words. It comes with consequences. Weeks passed and Amanda's messages turned from pleased to short, uncertain updates. "We're managing," she wrote once. Another time, "Chat is difficult." I read them but never replied. Each unread notification was a reminder of the silence she gave me when I needed her most. Instead, I focused on my plan. Repairs on the building were moving quickly now. Fresh paint brightened the halls, new locks clicked shut with confidence, and the tenants, other families who had nothing to do with my pain, began thanking the property manager for improvements. Their smiles gave me a strange comfort. I was turning the place that once humiliated me into something better. But for Amanda and Chad, things grew tighter. Rent was higher, bills were stacking, and Chad's temper was cracking through the thin walls. Neighbors whispered that arguments were constant, loud enough to shake the building at night. I didn't need to listen. I could already imagine the fury in Chad's voice, the helpless nodding of Amanda beside him. One evening I parked across the street, watching their apartment light flicker. Part of me longed to knock on the door, to hug Amanda and tell her she wasn't alone. But then I remembered the night they let me walk out with only 2 suitcases. That memory froze me in place. Back in my rented apartment, I poured tea and sat in silence. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. I had my own key, my own income, my own control. Revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about balance. And slowly the balance was shifting back to me. Amanda had a choice to make now. Continue standing with Chad, or remember the mother who once stood for her. Until then, my silence would remain her mirror. The months that followed felt like the closing of a circle. My life no longer revolved around Amanda's silence or Chad's cruelty. Instead, it revolved around me, my choices, my strength, my future. I watched quietly as Amanda and Chad struggled. Their car was repossessed, their arguments louder, their faces more tired each time I glimpsed them from afar. The man who once called me a burden now lived under the weight of his own arrogance. And the daughter who once turned her face away now had no choice but to confront the truth she helped create. One evening, Amanda left another message. Her voice was trembling, softer than I'd ever heard. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know it would get this bad. I miss you. I wish we could start over." I listened, tears in my eyes, but didn't reply. Not yet. Forgiveness wasn't a word you tossed around like loose change. It was earned slowly, carefully. And Amanda still had a journey to walk before she could understand the depth of what she had broken. That night, I closed my mother's diary for the last time and placed it on my shelf. Her secrets had given me strength, but my own choices had given me freedom. I wasn't the erased woman sitting on a curb anymore. I was someone rebuilt from ashes, someone who had learned that silence can be louder than screams. As I looked out over the city lights, a smile touched my face. This wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning of a life finally lived on my terms. And if you've listened this far, remember, life has a way of testing us, but sometimes the quietest revenge is simply surviving stronger.